first time anyone noticed something unusual about the little girl. She was sitting on the floor beside an old piano that had not been tuned in years. The piano stood against the living room wall, its wood slightly faded and its keys worn from time. It had belonged to her grandmother, who used to play simple songs on quiet evenings. After her grandmother passed away, the piano stayed in the house like a silent memory. The girl was only 8 years old, small for her age, with curious eyes that seemed to study everything around her. While other children in the neighborhood spent their afternoons riding bicycles or playing games outside, she often stayed indoors. Not because she was forced to, but because she liked the calm. She liked listening. She liked sounds. One afternoon, her mother heard something strange coming from the living room. It was not noise. It was not random hitting of keys. It was a melody, soft, clear and steady. At first, her mother thought it was coming from the radio. But when she walked closer, she saw her daughter sitting on the bench, her small fingers pressing the keys gently. She was playing a tune that her grandmother used to hum. The surprising part was that no one had taught her that song. Her mother stood still and listened. The notes were not perfect, but they were close. Very close. The girl was not looking at any sheet music. She was not guessing. She was remembering. When she finished, she turned around with a shy smile, as if she had done something small. "Did you like it?" she asked softly. Her mother nodded, still trying to understand what she had just heard. From that day on, the piano was no longer silent. The girl began spending hours with it. She would press one key, then another, listening carefully. Sometimes she would repeat the same short pattern again and again until it sounded right. She was not impatient. She did not rush. She listened more than she played. Her father noticed that she could repeat songs after hearing them only once. During car rides, if a song played on the radio, she would sit quietly. Later that evening, she would walk to the piano and slowly play the same melody. It was not always exact, but it was close enough to surprise anyone who heard it. They decided to test her in a playful way. One evening, her father played a short melody on his phone, something new that she had never heard before. It was not a simple children's song. It had quick notes and small changes in rhythm. She listened carefully, only once. Then she walked to the piano and tried to find the notes. Took her a minute. She paused a few times. But then, piece by piece, the melody appeared under her fingers. Her parents looked at each other in silence. This was not normal. Still, they did not want to push her too hard. She was only a child. They believed childhood should be light and joyful. But they also knew that gifts should not be ignored. A few weeks later, they arranged for her to meet a local piano teacher. The teacher had worked with many students over the years. Some were hardworking. Some were talented. A few were both. But when the little girl sat down and played for the first time, the teacher felt something different. "Play anything you like," the teacher said kindly. The girl thought for a moment. Then she began playing a tune she had heard in a movie. It was not written for beginners. It had fast runs and soft, emotional parts. Her hands were small, but they moved with surprising confidence. The teacher did not interrupt. When she finished, the room was quiet. "How long have you been practicing?" the teacher asked. She looked confused. "I just play," she answered. The teacher smiled, but inside, she felt a deep sense of wonder. Lessons began the following week. What amazed the teacher most was not only her ear for music. It was her focus. Most children her age struggled to sit still for long. They would get distracted or tired. But this girl could sit at the piano for an hour without complaint. When she made a mistake, she did not get frustrated. She simply tried again. She also asked unusual questions. "Why does this part sound sad?" she once asked while pointing to a section of a classical piece. The teacher paused. Many adults never asked that question. They just played the notes. "Because of the way the notes move," the teacher explained gently. "They fall instead of rise." The girl nodded slowly, then played it again, softer this time, as if she understood the feeling behind it. Word began to spread quietly among friends and neighbors. They heard about the young girl who could replay songs after hearing them once. Some did not believe it. Others were curious. One evening, a small group gathered in the living room. Nothing formal. Just neighbors sitting on chairs, holding cups of tea. The girl was nervous at first. She was not used to people watching her. Her mother whispered, "Just play like you always do." She took a deep breath and began. At first, her hands trembled slightly. But after the first few notes, something changed. The world around her seemed to disappear. There was no audience. No whispers. Only sound. She played 3 short pieces. One cheerful, one soft, and one fast. When she finished, the room was completely silent for a second. Then came applause. Not loud and wild, but warm and full of surprise. An older neighbor wiped tears from her eyes. "She feels the music," the neighbor said quietly. That night, after everyone left, the girl sat alone at the piano again. Not to practice, not to perform, just to play. Music was not a task to her. It was like breathing. It helped her understand feelings she did not always have words for. At school, she was quiet but kind. She did well in her classes, though math was not her favorite subject. During lunch breaks, she sometimes tapped rhythms on the table without noticing. Her classmates would laugh and ask her to play songs for them. She would smile but rarely showed off. Her teacher at school once asked the class what they wanted to be when they grew up. Some said doctors. Some said athletes. When it was her turn, she thought for a long moment. "I want to play music that makes people feel calm," she finally said. The answer was simple, but it stayed with the teacher. Months passed, and her skills grew quickly. Pieces that once seemed difficult became easy. Her fingers moved faster. Her control became stronger. But what truly stood out was her expression. She did not just press keys. She told stories through sound. One afternoon, her piano teacher introduced her to a much harder piece than usual. It was complex, with quick changes and detailed sections. Most students twice her age would struggle with it. The teacher expected her to take weeks just to understand the first page. Instead, the girl studied it quietly. She did not rush to play. She traced the notes with her eyes. She hummed parts softly under her breath. Then she began. She did not play it perfectly that day, but she understood it. That was clear. The teacher watched closely. There was no fear in the child's face, only curiosity. After the lesson, the teacher called her parents aside. "She has something rare," the teacher said gently. "Not just talent, depth." Her parents felt both proud and worried. They did not want pressure to steal her joy. At home that evening, they asked her a simple question. "Do you like practicing?" She thought for a moment. "I like finding new sounds," she replied. That answer gave them comfort. They decided to support her, but gently. No strict schedules. No harsh demands. Just steady guidance and care. As her 8th birthday approached, the teacher mentioned a regional music competition for young performers. It was known to be challenging. Judges were strict. The audience expected high levels of skill. Her parents hesitated. She was still so young. But when they told her about it, her eyes lit up. "Will there be a big piano?" she asked. "Yes," her mother smiled. She nodded slowly. "I want to try." There was no pride in her voice. No need to prove anything. Only quiet excitement. That night, long after the lights were turned off, she lay awake thinking about the sound of a grand piano in a large hall. She imagined the echo of each note floating into the air. She was not thinking about winning. She was thinking about music. And somewhere deep inside, though she did not know it yet, a moment was waiting for her. A moment that would test her in ways no one expected. For now, she was just a small girl with big curiosity, sitting at an old piano, listening carefully to the world of sound unfolding beneath her fingertips. The announcement of the regional music competition changed the rhythm of the house. Until then, music had been something gentle and private. It lived in the living room, between homework and dinner, between quiet evenings and soft conversations. Now there was a date circled on the calendar. The competition would take place in a large concert hall in the city, nearly 2 hours away. Young musicians from different towns would attend. Some had been training for many years. Some had already won awards. The event was known for its strict judges and difficult standards. When her teacher first handed her the registration form, she looked at it carefully, as if it were a treasure map. "Will there be many people?" she asked. "Yes," the teacher replied honestly, "and a very big piano." That answer was enough. In the weeks that followed, practice became more focused, but it never felt heavy. Her parents made sure of that. They did not set long hours. They did not raise their voices. They simply reminded her to stay steady. Each afternoon, she sat at the piano bench with her back straight and her feet stretching toward the pedals. The piece she chose for the competition was not simple. It had soft beginning notes that slowly built into fast, flowing sections. It required control, patience, and strength. At first, some parts were difficult. Her fingers were small and certain chords felt like a stretch. She paused often, looking at her hands as if trying to understand how to make them grow longer. Her teacher showed her small adjustments. "Do not force it," she said gently. "Let your hands move naturally." So the girl tried again and again. She did not complain. She did not sigh loudly when she missed a note. She simply repeated the section until it felt smooth. Sometimes she would close her eyes and play slowly, listening to the way each note connected to the next. One evening, her father found her still practicing long after dinner. "It's getting late," he said softly. She stopped and looked up. "I almost have it," she replied. There was no frustration in her voice, only quiet determination. As the competition day grew closer, her teacher decided to prepare her for something unexpected. "Sometimes judges may test you," the teacher explained. "They might ask you to play something different, or they may give you a surprise challenge." The girl tilted her head slightly. "Why?" "Because they want to see how you think, not just how you practice." She thought about that for a long moment. "That sounds interesting," she said. Her teacher smiled. Most children would feel nervous hearing such a thing, but she did not seem afraid. She seemed curious. A week before the event, they visited the concert hall for the first time. It was larger than anything she had seen before. The ceiling felt high enough to hold the sky. Rows of empty seats stretched far back, and at the center of the stage stood a grand piano, shining under bright lights. She walked toward it slowly. Her small reflection appeared on its polished surface. "Can I try?" she asked. The hall manager nodded. She climbed onto the bench and pressed one key. The sound filled the entire space. It echoed softly, floating to the back wall and returning gently. Her eyes widened. At home, the piano's sound stayed inside one room. Here, the notes traveled freely. She played a short scale, then a small part of her piece. The sound was different, bigger, more alive. She turned to her parents with a quiet smile. "It feels like the music can breathe here," she said. That night she slept deeply. Competition day arrived with clear skies and cool air. The car ride to the city was quiet. She looked out the window most of the time, watching trees and buildings pass by. Her mother held her hand in the back seat. "Are you nervous?" her mother asked gently. She thought about it. "A little," she admitted. "But I want to see what happens." When they arrived, the entrance was already busy. Families moved in and out, carrying music folders and garment bags. Some children practiced quietly on small keyboards they had brought along. Others walked quickly with serious faces. She held her sheet music close to her chest, though she had memorized every note. Inside the waiting area, she noticed that many of the contestants were older. Some looked like teenagers. Their fingers moved quickly across invisible keys as they practiced in the air. A few glanced at her with surprise. She sat quietly beside her parents. A large board displayed the performance order. Her name was near the middle. Time moved slowly. From behind the closed stage doors, music could be heard. Some performances were smooth and confident. Others had small mistakes that made the audience shift in their seats. When a boy about twice her age came off stage, he looked pale and tense. "They're very strict," someone whispered nearby. She listened but did not react. Finally, her number was called. Her mother knelt down in front of her. "Just play like you do at home," she said softly. Her father squeezed her shoulder. "Enjoy the piano." She nodded. Then she walked toward the stage. The bright lights felt warm on her face. The audience appeared as soft shadows beyond the glare. The grand piano waited in the center, calm and still. She adjusted the bench slightly. Her feet barely reached the pedals, but she had practiced this many times. She placed her hands in her lap and took one slow breath. In the front row sat the judges. 3 of them. Serious expressions. Notebooks open. Pens ready. One of them leaned forward slightly, studying her. For a brief moment, the hall was completely silent. Then she began. The first notes were soft and clear. They floated gently into the space, just as they had during rehearsal. Her hands moved carefully, not rushed. Each phrase had shape. Each pause felt natural. As the piece grew stronger, her confidence grew with it. The faster sections came smoothly. Her fingers moved with surprising control for someone so small. The audience leaned forward almost without realizing it. Halfway through, she forgot about the judges. She forgot about the competition. There was only sound. When she reached the final chord, she let it ring fully before lifting her hands. Silence followed. Then applause filled the hall. Not wild, not overwhelming, but real. She stood and bowed politely. Before she could step away, one of the judges raised a hand. "Please wait," he said. The room quieted again. The judge spoke calmly. "You play with confidence," he began. "But we would like to test something." Her heart beat a little faster, but her face remained calm. He opened a folder and placed a new sheet of music on the piano's stand. "This is a more advanced piece," he explained. "We would like you to look at a short section and try to play it." A soft murmur passed through the audience. It was not common to give surprise challenges, especially to someone so young. She looked at the sheet music carefully. The notes were close together. The rhythm was complex. There were fast runs that climbed and fell quickly across the page. She swallowed quietly. In the front row, her parents sat very still. "You may take a moment," the judge added. She nodded and leaned closer to the music. Her eyes moved slowly across the notes. She did not rush. She did not touch the keys yet. She traced the pattern with her finger in the air, as if mapping the path before walking it. One of the judges demonstrated a small part to show the tempo, but even he stumbled slightly on the quickest section. A few people in the audience exchanged glances. The piece was not easy. She closed her eyes briefly, listening to the echo of the judge's attempt. Then she placed her hands above the keys. The hall became silent once more. In that quiet moment, she was no longer just a child in a competition. She was a listener, a thinker, a small figure facing a large test. And though no one in the room knew it yet, the next few seconds would change everything. Her fingers hovered above the keys, but she did not press them yet. The sheet music in front of her looked crowded, almost intimidating. The notes were packed tightly together, moving up and down in fast patterns. It was the kind of piece that older students spent months practicing. She could feel the eyes in the room resting on her small hands. For a brief second, doubt tried to enter her mind. What if she missed the notes? What if her fingers slipped? What if everyone realized she was just a child after all? But then she remembered something simple. At home, when she faced a hard part, she never rushed. She listened first. So she lowered her hands and did something unexpected. She did not play. Instead, she looked at the page again and softly tapped the rhythm on the wooden side of the piano. Very lightly, almost like a whisper. The audience watched in silence. One of the judges leaned back slightly, curious. She traced the pattern of the first fast run with her eyes. Down, up again, then a small jump, then a quick turn. She imagined the sound in her mind before touching the keys. Her piano teacher had once told her, "If you can hear it clearly inside, your fingers will find it outside." She took one slow breath. Then she began. The first few notes were careful. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. She played the opening phrase slowly, making sure her hands understood the distance between the keys. Then she reached the fast section. There was a tiny pause. In that pause, you could almost hear the entire hall holding its breath. Her right hand moved first, gliding across the keys in a quick upward run. The notes came out clean, clear, even. A soft sound of surprise moved through the audience. Her left hand followed smoothly, supporting the rhythm without rushing. The two hands met again in the middle, then separated in opposite directions. It was not perfect in the way a machine would be perfect. It was alive. There was shape in it. There was intention. When she reached the part where the judge had stumbled earlier, she did not slow down out of fear. She leaned into it gently, her fingers stepping across the keys with light confidence. The difficult passage flowed. One note led naturally into the next like water finding its path. 3 seconds passed, then 4, then 5. Before anyone realized it, she had completed the entire challenging section without breaking the rhythm. The last note of the excerpt rang softly in the air. Silence filled the hall. Not confused silence. Stunned silence. Her hands remained resting on the keys for a moment longer, as if she was making sure the sound had fully settled. Then she slowly lifted them and looked toward the judges. Her face did not show pride. It showed focus. One of the judges glanced down at his sheet, then back at her. Another judge removed her glasses briefly, as if needing to look again to be sure. The third judge leaned forward. "Could you continue?" he asked. She nodded softly. She had only prepared a short section in her mind, but now she understood the pattern. The piece was no longer a stranger. It had introduced itself. She placed her fingers back on the keys and continued playing from the next line. This time she did not hesitate at all. The music became fuller, stronger. The fast notes blended with slower, emotional phrases. She shaped each part naturally, as if telling a story she had just learned. In the audience, her mother pressed her hands together tightly in her lap. Her father sat very still, afraid that even the smallest movement might break the moment. Near the back row, a teenage contestant who had performed earlier watched with wide eyes. The piece demanded quick jumps across the keyboard. Her hands moved confidently from one end to the other. When the melody dropped into a softer section, she softened with it. When it rose again, she followed without fear. She was no longer reacting to the challenge. She was owning it. There was a natural musical sense in the way she balanced speed and control. She did not rush to impress. She did not hit the keys harshly to prove strength. Instead, she allowed the notes to speak clearly. Halfway through the continuation, something changed in the room. The tension disappeared. What had started as a test now felt like a performance. Even the judges' expressions softened. Their pens, once ready to mark mistakes, now rested quietly on their notebooks. When she reached the final line of the excerpt, she slowed slightly, giving the closing notes room to breathe. The last chord rang out clean and steady. She lifted her hands. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Then, from somewhere in the middle rows, a single pair of hands began to clap. It was hesitant at first. Then another joined, and another. Within seconds, the entire hall was filled with applause. Not polite applause, real applause, the kind that comes from surprise. She blinked softly, almost confused by the reaction. She stood up and gave a small bow, just as she had practiced. But before she could leave the stage, one of the judges spoke again. "Young lady," he said carefully, "how long did you study that piece?" She looked at the sheet music still resting on the stand. "Just now," she answered honestly. A quiet ripple of whispers moved through the audience. The judge looked down at his notes once more, then back at her. "You have strong listening skills," he said. "And courage." She did not fully understand what he meant by courage. To her, she had simply tried. "Thank you," she replied politely. Another judge leaned toward the microphone. "Music is not only about playing the right notes," she said. "It is about understanding what the notes want to say. You showed that today." Her cheeks turned slightly pink. She gave one more small bow and walked off the stage. As soon as she reached the side hallway, her mother wrapped her in a careful hug. "You were wonderful," she whispered. Her father knelt down to her level. "How did you stay so calm?" he asked softly. She thought about it. "I just listened," she said. Back inside the hall, the next contestant was already preparing to play. The competition continued as planned. But something had shifted. People were still talking quietly about what they had just seen. In the waiting area, a few older students approached her shyly. "That was really hard," one of them admitted. "I tried that piece last year." She smiled gently. "It sounded interesting," she replied. She did not brag. She did not replay the moment loudly in her mind. Instead, she asked one of the older students what piece they were performing next. For her, music was not about beating others. It was about learning. When all the performances were finished, the judges left the hall to make their final decisions. The contestants and families waited. The room buzzed with quiet conversations. Some parents looked anxious. Some children reviewed small mistakes they thought they had made. She sat between her parents, swinging her feet gently above the floor. "Are you thinking about the results?" her mother asked. She shook her head. "I'm thinking about that fast part," she said. "It felt like running down a hill." Her father smiled softly. "A safe hill, I hope." She giggled. After what felt like a very long time, the judges returned to the stage. The hall grew quiet once more. The chief judge stepped to the microphone with a calm expression. "Today," he began, "we saw many strong performances. Each of you brought something special. But one performance stood out not only for skill, but for musical understanding beyond years." Her heart beat a little faster. She did not look at her parents. She looked at the stage. And in that moment, whether she won or not, something important had already happened. She had faced doubt. She had faced a challenge. And she had answered it with music. The rest was simply waiting. The hall was so quiet that even the smallest sound seemed loud. A program booklet slipped from someone's hand and landed softly on the floor. A chair moved slightly in the back row. Every ear was waiting for the next words from the stage. She sat still between her parents. Her hands rested in her lap, but her fingers were moving lightly against each other, almost as if they were still playing invisible keys. The chief judge looked down at the paper in his hand. "Third place," he announced clearly, calling a name that brought cheers from one side of the room. Applause filled the space. A tall teenager walked to the stage and accepted the certificate with a proud smile. "Second place," the judge continued. Another name was called. More applause. More footsteps across the stage. Now only one title remained. First place. The little girl did not move. She was not counting the prizes in her head. She was remembering the sound of that fast run, the way her fingers had flown across the keys. "First place," the judge said slowly, "goes to the youngest performer in today's competition." A soft wave of surprise moved through the audience even before he said her name. When her name was finally spoken, her mother gasped quietly. Her father let out a long breath he had been holding for minutes. She blinked once, almost unsure if she had heard correctly. Her mother touched her shoulder gently. "That's you," she whispered. She stood up slowly, smoothing the front of her dress without thinking. The walk to the stage felt longer than before. The bright lights were still warm, but now they seemed softer. The chief judge handed her the certificate and a small trophy. It was heavier than she expected. "You showed remarkable musical understanding today," he said, his voice steady but kind. "Especially when faced with something you had not prepared. That takes courage and deep listening." She nodded politely. "Thank you," she said in a small voice. Another judge leaned toward the microphone. "Never lose your curiosity," she added. "It is more valuable than winning." She did not fully understand how important those words were, but she felt their warmth. The audience applauded again, louder this time. Some people stood up. From the back rows, a few contestants clapped with genuine smiles. The teenage boy who had looked pale earlier was now clapping too, his expression thoughtful rather than upset. She bowed once more, careful not to drop the trophy, and walked off stage. The moment she reached her parents, her mother hugged her tightly. "We are so proud of you," she whispered. Her father gently touched the trophy. "It suits you," he said with a soft laugh. She looked down at it. "Can we go home soon?" she asked. They both smiled. For her, the day was already complete. The applause, the lights, the certificate, they were nice. But what stayed in her heart was the feeling of playing something new and making sense of it. As they walked toward the exit, several people stopped them. One elderly man shook her hand and said, "I have attended this competition for years. I have never seen someone your age handle a surprise piece like that." She smiled shyly. "It was interesting," she replied. A music teacher from another town asked her parents about her training. "How many hours does she practice each day?" the teacher asked. Her mother answered honestly, "Not too many. We try to keep it balanced." The teacher nodded slowly, clearly impressed. Outside the hall, the evening air felt cool and fresh. The sky had turned soft orange as the sun began to set. She held the trophy with both hands as they walked to the car. "Did you know you would win?" her father asked gently once they were inside. She shook her head. "No, I just wanted to try the hard part again," she said. Her parents exchanged a look. That answer said more than any celebration could. The drive home felt different from the morning drive. The city lights passed by quietly through the window. She leaned her head against the seat and watched them blur into long lines of light. "Are you tired?" her mother asked. "A little," she replied, "but happy." When they arrived home, the old piano in the living room waited just as it always had. Nothing about it had changed. She placed the trophy gently on top of it. For a moment, she simply stood there looking at both. The shiny new prize and the worn wooden piano that had started everything. Then she sat down. "You want to play again?" her father asked, surprised. She nodded. Just a little. She did not play the competition piece. She did not play the difficult challenge. Instead, she played the simple melody her grandmother used to hum. The notes were soft, familiar, warm. Her mother sat on the couch and listened, her eyes slightly wet. The house felt peaceful. In the days that followed, something unexpected happened. A short video clip of her performance had been recorded by someone in the audience. It was not perfect quality. The camera had shaken slightly, but the sound of that fast run was clear. The video began to spread online. At first, only a few people shared it. Then more. Comments appeared. "Is she really 8? How did she play that without practice? This is incredible." Her parents noticed the growing attention but stayed calm. "We must protect her childhood," her mother said firmly. They did not allow interviews right away. They did not rush to accept every invitation that came. But offers did come. Music schools reached out. Concert organizers sent emails. Even a local news station asked to visit their home. Her parents discussed each request carefully. One evening, they sat with her at the kitchen table. "Some people want to hear you play again," her father explained gently. "On bigger stages." She listened quietly. "Will there still be a big piano?" she asked. They laughed softly. "Yes," her mother replied. She thought about it for a moment. "Can I still go to school with my friends?" "Of course," her father answered immediately. She nodded. "Then okay. But not too many." Her simple condition reminded them of what mattered most. Weeks later, she was invited to perform at a small charity concert in the city. This time, there was no competition, no judges, just people who wanted to enjoy music. Before stepping on stage, she felt a different kind of nervousness. "What if they expect something impossible?" she asked her teacher quietly. Her teacher smiled. "Just play honestly. That is enough." She remembered those words when she sat at the piano. The audience was larger than before, but the feeling was warmer. She played with the same focus, the same listening heart. When she reached a fast section, she did not think about being impressive. She thought about clarity. After the performance, many people stood to applaud. But what touched her most was a woman who approached her afterward. "My father has been very ill," the woman said softly. "He has not smiled in weeks." But during your music, he closed his eyes and smiled. Thank you. The girl did not know what to say at first. Then she simply replied, I'm glad. That night she understood something new. Music was not about trophies. It was not about surprise challenges. It was not even about being the youngest. It was about reaching someone's heart. Back at home, the old piano remained her favorite place. Even with bigger stages waiting, she still returned to the living room bench every afternoon. She practiced scales. She explored new pieces. She made small mistakes and corrected them. Nothing about her daily life changed in a dramatic way. She still did homework. She still laughed with friends. She still asked questions about why certain notes sounded sad or hopeful. But inside, something had grown stronger. She had faced a public test and did not shrink. She had heard doubt in the air and answered with calm sound. And without fully realizing it, she had begun a journey that would take her far beyond that first competition stage. For now, though, she was still just a small girl sitting at a piano, listening carefully, one note at a time. Life did not slow down after the competition. In some ways, it became busier. Letters arrived in the mailbox almost every week. Emails filled her parents' inbox. Invitations came from music schools, event organizers, and even small television programs that wanted to feature her story. But inside the house, mornings still began the same way. Breakfast at the kitchen table. School bag packed near the door. A quick glance at the old piano before heading out. Her parents worked hard to keep her world steady. They chose carefully which invitations to accept. They said no more often than yes. They wanted her talent to grow, but not at the cost of her childhood. At school, some classmates had seen the video online. You're famous now, one boy joked during lunch. She looked confused. I just played the piano, she replied. A few students asked her to perform during the school assembly. At first she hesitated. Playing in a big hall with judges was one thing. Playing in front of classmates who knew her every day felt different. What if I make a mistake? She asked her teacher quietly. Her teacher smiled. Then you will show everyone that mistakes are part of learning. That answer gave her comfort. The day of the assembly, she walked onto the small school stage with her usual calm steps. The piano there was not as grand as the one at the competition. Some keys were slightly out of tune, but she did not complain. She adjusted the bench and began to play. The room slowly grew quiet. Students who had been whispering stopped. Teachers looked up from their seats. She chose a gentle piece this time. Not the hardest one. Not the fastest. Just something beautiful and clear. When she finished, the applause from her classmates felt different from the competition applause. It was louder, more excited, more personal. As she walked back to her seat, one girl leaned over and whispered, I didn't know the piano could sound like that. That comment stayed with her for days. Meanwhile, her teacher began introducing her to more advanced music. Longer pieces, more complex emotions. Some compositions required strong hand stretches. Others demanded deep control over soft sounds. One afternoon, after working through a difficult section, she sighed for the first time in weeks. It's not coming out the way I hear it in my head, she said. Her teacher nodded. That means your ear is growing faster than your hands. That's normal. She looked down at her fingers. Will they catch up? If you are patient. Patience was something she understood. At home, she began practicing more thoughtfully. Instead of repeating the same mistake again and again, she would stop and think. She would hum the phrase. She would slow it down until every movement felt clear. Her father sometimes stood quietly in the doorway, listening. He noticed something new in her playing. It was deeper now, less about showing skill, more about meaning. One evening, after finishing a long practice session, she turned to him and asked, Do you think music can change someone's day? He thought carefully before answering. I think it already has, he said. As months passed, she was invited to perform at a youth music festival in another city. This event was larger than the first competition. There would be professional musicians attending, critics, reporters. Her parents discussed it for days. It might bring more attention, her mother said. But it could also bring experience, her father replied. In the end, they decided to let her go with one condition. She would treat it as a chance to learn, not as a test to win. During the train ride to the festival, she looked out the window, watching fields and buildings blur past. Are you nervous this time? Her mother asked. She nodded slightly. A little more than before. Why? Because more people will be listening. Her father leaned forward. Then play for one person, he suggested. Pick someone in the room and imagine you are playing only for them. She thought about that idea carefully. The festival hall was grand and full of energy. Musicians carried instruments in every direction. Violins, cellos, flutes. The air buzzed with scales and warm-up notes. When it was her turn to rehearse on stage, she touched the grand piano gently, as if greeting an old friend. She tested a few keys. The sound was rich and powerful. Remember, her teacher reminded her softly, do not rush the quiet parts. On the evening of her performance, the seats were filled. Bright lights shone down again, but she was getting used to them now. She walked onto the stage with steady steps. This time, she chose a piece that told a story of change. Starting soft, growing strong, then returning to calm. As she began, she looked toward the middle row and noticed an older woman sitting very still, hands folded in her lap. The woman's eyes were closed, as if she was ready to listen deeply. She decided to play for her. The first notes were gentle, clear. She let them float without pushing them forward. When the music grew louder, she allowed her hands to move freely but kept control. Halfway through, there was a section filled with quick notes, similar to the surprise challenge months ago. This time, she did not feel pressure. She felt prepared. Her fingers ran across the keys with confidence. The rhythm stayed steady. The melody remained clear. When she reached the final chord, she let it fade naturally before lifting her hands. The silence afterward felt warm rather than tense. Then the applause came, stronger than before. She stood and bowed, remembering to breathe slowly. After the performance, several musicians approached her. One man with gray hair said, "Your control in the soft passages is rare at your age. Keep protecting that sensitivity." Another woman added, "Do not let praise rush you. Stay curious." She listened carefully to every word. Later that evening, as they walked back to their hotel, she felt tired but peaceful. "Did you pick someone to play for?" her father asked. She nodded. An older lady in the middle row. She closed her eyes the whole time. Her mother smiled. Maybe she needed that music tonight. Back in their room, she sat by the window and looked out at the city lights. "I like big halls," she said softly, "but I still like our living room more." Her parents laughed gently. Over the next year, she continued to grow, not just in skill but in understanding. She learned that applause fades quickly, but learning stays. She learned that some days would feel easy, and others would feel heavy. There were moments of frustration too. Days when her hands felt tired. Days when a piece would not come together the way she hoped. On one such evening, she closed the piano lid gently and sat quietly on the bench. Her mother sat beside her. "Hard day?" she asked. She nodded. "I can't make it sound the way I imagine." Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "That means you are growing." She thought about that. Growing did not always feel comfortable. But she understood that music, like life, required patience. The trophy from her first competition still sat on top of the old piano. It gathered a thin layer of dust over time. One afternoon, she wiped it clean and looked at her reflection in its shiny surface. She was still small, still curious, still learning, but she was no longer just the girl who surprised the judges. She was becoming a musician who understood that real success was not about proving others wrong. It was about staying true to the sound inside her heart. And somewhere ahead, new challenges were waiting. Bigger stages, harder pieces, stronger expectations. But she did not fear them, because she had already learned something important. When faced with something difficult, she did not need to rush. She only needed to listen. Years did not pass all at once. They moved slowly, one season at a time, one new piece at a time, one small stage after another. She was still young, but she was no longer the tiny girl whose feet barely touched the pedals. She had grown taller. Her hands had grown stronger. The old piano in the living room had been tuned many times, but it still stood in the same place against the same wall. People often asked her parents the same question. When did you know she would become special? Her parents would always give the same answer. We knew she loved music. That was enough. As her name slowly became more familiar in music circles, invitations became more serious. Not just small festivals now, but respected concert series. Not just local news, but music magazines that wanted to write about her journey. But inside the house, nothing dramatic changed. She still woke up early for school. She still forgot where she left her pencils. She still laughed at simple jokes. Music was growing with her, not replacing her. One spring afternoon, her teacher brought her a new piece. It was long, nearly 20 minutes. It had deep emotional parts, strong dramatic sections, and quiet moments that felt almost fragile. This is not easy, the teacher said honestly. She looked at the thick pages of notes. It looks like a story, she replied. It is, her teacher said. And you must tell it clearly. This piece would be her biggest challenge yet. The first few weeks were difficult. Some sections required fast jumps across the keyboard. Others needed such soft control that even the smallest mistake could be heard. There were days she felt strong, and days she felt frustrated. One evening, after repeating a hard passage many times, she stopped suddenly. Why can't I get this part right? She asked, her voice tired. Her father, who had been listening from the doorway, walked in quietly. Maybe the piece is teaching you something, he said. Like what? Patience. She sighed softly but smiled a little. She began breaking the hard section into smaller pieces. One line at a time, one hand at a time, slower than before, listening carefully. Took weeks, but slowly the piece began to come together. When the day of her biggest concert arrived, the hall was larger than any she had played before. The seats were filled with strangers who had bought tickets just to hear her perform. Backstage, she sat quietly, hands resting on her knees. Do you remember the first competition? Her mother asked softly. She nodded. The surprise piece, she said. Yes, her father added. You trusted yourself that day. She took a slow breath. I'll do the same today. When her name was announced, the applause was strong even before she reached the piano. She walked to the center of the stage, bowed politely, and sat down. The grand piano felt different from the old one at home, but her hands adjusted quickly. She placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes were deep and steady. The hall responded with silence. As the piece unfolded, she moved through each section with care. The dramatic parts were powerful but not rushed. The soft parts were clear but not weak. Halfway through, she reached the section that had once caused her so much frustration. For a moment, the memory of those difficult practice days flashed through her mind. Then she played it. Not perfectly in a cold way, but honestly. Her fingers moved with strength and calm control. The rhythm stayed steady. The melody rose and fell naturally. She did not think about the audience. She did not think about reviews. She did not think about being impressive. She thought about telling the story inside the music. When the final section arrived, it returned to a soft, gentle theme. She let the notes breathe. The last chord rang out clearly, then slowly faded into silence. She lifted her hands. For a moment, the hall was completely still. Then the applause began. It was not just loud. It was long. Some people stood. Others wiped tears from their eyes. She stood and bowed again, her heart beating fast but steady. As she walked off stage, she felt something deeper than excitement. She felt grateful. Backstage, her teacher hugged her tightly. You told the story beautifully, she said. Her parents stood nearby, smiling with quiet pride. Later that night, after the crowd had gone and the lights had dimmed, she returned home. The house was calm and familiar. She walked straight to the old piano and touched its surface gently. "We started here," she whispered. She sat down and played a few soft notes. Nothing complicated, just simple sounds. It reminded her that no matter how big the stage became, her love for music had begun in a small living room. In the years that followed, she continued to grow. She studied under respected teachers. She traveled to different cities and countries. She met other musicians who inspired her. But she never forgot the feeling of that first surprise challenge. When young students asked her for advice, she always said the same thing. Listen before you play. One afternoon, she was invited back to the same regional competition where everything had started. This time, not as a contestant, but as a guest performer. The hall looked smaller than she remembered. The stage felt less intimidating. As she sat in the audience before her performance, she watched the young contestants carefully. She could see nervous hands, focused faces, quiet hope. She recognized that feeling. When it was her turn to perform, the applause welcomed her warmly. She played with calm confidence. At the end of her performance, one of the judges, older now with more gray hair, stepped forward. "Years ago," he said into the microphone, "a young girl stood on this stage and surprised us all. Today, she returns not as a surprise, but as an inspiration." She smiled softly. After the event, a small girl approached her shyly. "I was very nervous," the girl admitted. "But when I heard you play, I felt better." She knelt down slightly so they were eye level. "Being nervous means you care," she said gently. "Just listen to the music. It will guide you." The little girl nodded. In that moment, she understood something clearly. Her journey was no longer just about her own growth. It was about passing on courage. That night, back at home, she sat once again at the old piano. The trophy from years ago still rested on top, polished and steady. She ran her fingers across the keys slowly. Music filled the room. Not loud, not dramatic, just true. She closed her eyes and listened. And in that quiet space, she felt the same joy she had felt as an 8-year-old girl discovering sound for the first time. The stages had grown bigger. The challenges had grown harder. The applause had grown louder. But her heart had stayed the same. Curious, patient, listening. And that, more than any trophy or title, was her greatest gift.